Hello, my best students, and welcome again to your channel, Native Flow. Today, we are not going to talk about motivation in the normal way, because honestly, motivation is easy when life is going well. It is easy to believe in yourself when everything is moving perfectly. It is easy to say, I will never give up when you are excited, supported, and full of energy. But what happens when nothing is working? What happens when you try again and again, but the results are still small? What happens when people around you start doubting you? What happens when your own mind whispers, maybe this is not for me? That moment, that quiet moment when nobody is clapping, when nobody sees your effort, when your dream feels far away, that is where the real psychology of never giving up begins. Because never giving up is not just about being strong. It is not just about pushing harder. And it is not about pretending that pain does not exist. No, real persistence is much deeper than that. It is the ability to fall, feel the disappointment, learn from what happened, change your strategy, and still continue moving forward. Because sometimes people misunderstand never giving up. They think it means doing the same thing forever, but that is not wisdom. That is just exhaustion. True persistence is different. True persistence means your dream stays alive, but your method can grow. Your goal stays meaningful, but your strategy can improve. Your identity becomes stronger because every setback teaches you something about yourself. And this is why some people keep going for years, while others stop after the first rejection. It is not because successful people never feel fear. They do. It is not because they never feel tired. They do. It is not because they are always confident. They are not. The difference is, they learned how to continue even when confidence is not there. They learned how to act even when motivation disappears. They learned how to separate one bad day from their whole future. And this is powerful, because one failure does not mean you are a failure. One slow season does not mean your dream is dead. One rejection does not mean your value is gone. Sometimes, it only means your brain is being trained, your patience is being tested, your strategy is being corrected, your character is being built. And in this episode, you will discover the real psychology behind people who refuse to quit, why the brain wants comfort, why setbacks hurt so much, why discipline becomes stronger than motivation, why identity matters more than temporary emotion, and how to keep going without destroying yourself mentally. Because this is not about blind hustle. This is not about forcing yourself until you break. This is about intelligent resilience, calm persistence, emotional strength, and the quiet power of becoming the kind of person who does not disappear when life gets difficult. So listen carefully, because this episode is not only about success, it is about your mind, your future, your English listening practice, your confidence, and the version of you that is waiting on the other side of consistency. Now, let's begin with truth number 1. The reason most people give up is not weakness. It is emotional shock. Truth number 1. Most people don't give up because they're weak. They give up because of emotional shock. Let's begin with something very important. Most people believe quitting happens because somebody is lazy, weak, undisciplined, not serious enough. But honestly, that is not usually true. Most people quit because they experience emotional shock they were never mentally prepared for. And this changes everything psychologically. Because when people imagine success, they imagine progress, growth, excitement, results. They imagine feeling inspired every day. But real growth rarely looks like that. Real growth is often repetitive, slow, confusing, emotionally uncomfortable, and sometimes deeply discouraging. That emotional gap between expectation and reality destroys many people silently. For example, someone starts learning English. The first week feels exciting, new vocabulary, new routines, new motivation. They imagine themselves becoming fluent quickly. But then something happens. Weeks pass, and speaking still feels difficult. They still freeze during conversations. They still forget words. And suddenly, their emotional energy crashes, not because they are incapable, but because reality did not match the fantasy they created in their head. This is emotional shock. And honestly, this happens in almost every area of life: fitness, business, relationships, learning, creativity. People are often not prepared for how emotionally uncomfortable progress actually feels. Now listen carefully, because this next idea is extremely powerful. The brain loves immediate rewards. It loves visible progress, fast pleasure, quick results. That is how human psychology works naturally. When you do something and quickly receive a reward, your brain says, "Good, continue." But long-term goals work differently. Sometimes you work hard for weeks without visible results. And during that period, your brain becomes confused. It starts asking dangerous questions. Why am I still trying? What if this never works? Maybe other people are simply more talented. Maybe I'm wasting my time. That internal dialogue destroys persistence more than difficulty itself, because often people do not lose against failure. They lose against interpretation. Two people can experience the exact same setback and react completely differently. One person says, "This proves I'm not good enough." The other says, "This is part of the process." Same situation, different psychology, different future. That is why mindset matters so much. Now, let me tell you something very honest. One of the biggest lies social media created is the illusion that successful people always feel confident. They don't. Most highly successful people experience fear, self-doubt, confusion, frustration far more often than people imagine. The difference is they learn not to treat temporary emotions as permanent truth. And honestly, that skill alone can completely change your life, because emotions are powerful, but they are not always accurate. A bad day can convince you your future is hopeless. One rejection can make you question your entire dream. One failure can temporarily make you forget years of progress. That is emotional shock. And if you do not understand this psychologically, you may accidentally quit during moments that were actually temporary. Now, here's something very important. The human brain naturally tries to protect you from discomfort. That is normal. Your brain wants safety, predictability, comfort. It wants to avoid embarrassment, uncertainty, and emotional pain. So when growth becomes difficult, your brain immediately searches for escape, distraction, excuses, delay, comfort habits. And honestly, this is why so many people suddenly become too busy right after failure, not because they truly lost all interest, but because avoidance temporarily reduces emotional pain. The brain says, "If I stop trying, I stop feeling disappointment. But there's a hidden danger there, because avoiding short-term pain often creates long-term regret. And regret is much heavier emotionally than temporary discomfort. Now, let me show you something extremely powerful. People who develop long-term persistence usually learn one important psychological skill. They stop making permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. This is huge because emotions change constantly. One day you feel unstoppable. Another day you feel exhausted. One morning you believe in yourself completely. Another night you question everything. That is human. But disciplined people understand something important. Feelings are weather, not identity. Rain does not mean the sky disappeared forever. And emotional difficulty does not mean your future disappeared either. Now think about this carefully. How many dreams are abandoned during emotional moments that would have passed naturally with time? How many talented people quit too early because they believed one painful moment represented the entire journey? How many opportunities disappear because somebody confused discomfort with impossibility? Honestly, probably millions. That is why emotional regulation matters so much in persistence. Not fake positivity, not pretending pain does not exist. Real emotional regulation means I acknowledge this moment is difficult, but I will not let one emotional wave define my entire future. That is emotional maturity, and honestly, that mindset becomes incredibly powerful over time. Because once you stop panicking during difficult moments, your resilience grows dramatically. Now, let me tell you another hidden truth. People who never give up are not emotionally numb. They feel disappointment deeply sometimes. They feel frustration. They feel fear. The difference is they learned recovery. That is the real secret. Recovery. They learned how to reset mentally after setbacks instead of collapsing completely. And honestly, this is where many people misunderstand resilience. Resilience is not never feeling pain. Resilience is returning after pain. That is a massive difference. Now imagine two learners practicing English. One makes mistakes and says, "I'm terrible at this." The other makes mistakes and says, "My brain is still adapting." That small psychological difference changes everything long term, because identity follows interpretation. If every setback becomes proof of failure, motivation slowly dies. But if setbacks become feedback, growth continues. Now listen carefully, because this next sentence matters deeply. Your future is not decided only by talent. It is decided by how you emotionally respond to difficulty. That response shapes consistency. Consistency shapes identity. And identity shapes destiny over time. So from today, I want you to stop asking, "Why is this hard?" and start asking, "How do I respond when things become hard?" That question is much more powerful, because the people who eventually succeed are often not the people who avoid emotional shock. They are the people who learn how to survive it without abandoning themselves. And in the next truth, we are going to explore why motivation disappears so quickly, why discipline quietly becomes stronger than emotion, and why the most consistent people often rely less on motivation than everybody else. Truth number 2, motivation is temporary, but identity can become permanent. Let's be honest about something. Motivation feels amazing. It gives you energy, focus, excitement, hope. When motivation is high, everything feels possible. You wake up early, you make plans, you believe in your future. And honestly, Many people begin their journey during one of these emotional highs: a new year, a motivational video, a painful breakup, a moment of inspiration. Suddenly, they feel ready to change their entire life. But then something very predictable happens. Motivation fades. And this is where most people become confused. They think, maybe I lost passion. Maybe I'm not disciplined enough. Maybe I was never serious. But no, motivation fading is normal human psychology. It happens to everyone, even highly successful people. Because motivation is emotional energy, and emotions naturally rise and fall. Nobody stays emotionally inspired every single day forever. That is impossible. Now listen carefully, because this next idea changes everything. People who never give up do not build their life around motivation. They build their life around identity. This is powerful psychologically, because motivation says, I feel like doing this today. But identity says, this is who I am becoming. That difference is enormous. Let me give you an example. A motivated person says, I want to learn English. But an identity-driven person says, I am becoming someone who speaks English confidently. Completely different psychology. The first depends on emotion. The second depends on self-image. And honestly, identity is much stronger than temporary feelings, because people naturally try to stay consistent with the identity they believe about themselves. Think about it. A person who identifies as healthy behaves differently from somebody trying to lose weight temporarily. A person who identifies as a writer continues writing even when inspiration disappears. And a person who identifies as someone who never stops learning keeps growing even during difficult seasons. Identity creates behavioral stability. And this is one of the deepest secrets behind persistence. Now, here's something extremely important. Most people focus too much on goals and not enough on identity. But goals are temporary moments. Identity is continuous. For example, becoming fluent in English is a goal, but becoming a person who practices English consistently, that is identity. And honestly, identity matters more long-term, because goals eventually finish, but identity continues shaping your actions daily. Now, let me tell you something fascinating about the human brain. Your brain constantly searches for evidence about who you are. Every action sends a message to your mind. When you practice, even on difficult days, your brain slowly says, this is what we do. When you continue after failure, your brain says, we are resilient. When you keep learning despite slow progress, your brain says, we do not quit easily. And over time, those repeated actions slowly build self-trust. This is extremely important psychologically, because many people secretly stop believing in themselves, not because they failed once, but because they repeatedly abandon their own promises. That destroys inner trust. But every time you continue despite discomfort, you rebuild that trust little by little. Now let's talk about discipline. Honestly, discipline is often misunderstood. People imagine discipline as aggression, extreme hustle, forcing yourself constantly. But real discipline is usually much quieter than that. Real discipline is emotional stability. It is the ability to continue small actions consistently, even when emotions change. That's it. And honestly, this becomes much easier when actions are connected to identity, because now you are no longer asking, do I feel motivated today? Instead, you ask, what would the person I want to become do today? That question changes behavior dramatically. Now, here's another important truth. Motivation often focuses on outcomes. Identity focuses on process. Motivated people obsess over results, views, money, speed, recognition, success. But identity-driven people focus more on repetition, practice, consistency, systems, and this creates emotional stability during slow progress periods. Because honestly, results are not always immediately visible, especially in long-term growth. Sometimes your brain is improving quietly before external results appear. This is true in fitness, language learning, business, confidence, mental strength, and people who rely only on visible results often quit too early. But identity-driven people continue because the process itself reinforces who they are becoming. Now listen carefully, because this next idea is powerful. The strongest people are not always the most motivated people. Often, they are simply the people who created routines that continue even when emotions fluctuate. That is why routines matter so much psychologically. Routines reduce emotional decision-making. Instead of debating daily, should I practice? The routine already answers. You simply show up. And honestly, this protects you from emotional inconsistency because emotions change constantly, but systems create stability. Now let me ask you something honestly. What identity are you reinforcing every day? Are you reinforcing, I always quit eventually? Or, I continue even when progress feels slow? Because whether you realize it or not, your daily actions are constantly teaching your brain who you are. And eventually, that identity becomes emotionally powerful. Now here's something beautiful about persistence. Every difficult moment survived strengthens identity. Every setback overcome becomes evidence. Every small promise kept becomes psychological proof. And slowly, your confidence stops depending on motivation. It starts depending on experience. You begin saying, I know I can continue because I already survived difficult moments before. That type of confidence is much deeper, much calmer, much more stable. Now let me tell you something very important. People who never give up are not constantly screaming motivational quotes in their mind. Often, they simply became emotionally connected to the person they are trying to become, and that identity pulls them forward during difficult seasons. That is real persistence. Not hype, not temporary excitement, identity. So from today, stop asking, how do I stay motivated forever? That is the wrong question. Instead ask, what kind of person am I training myself to become? Because once identity changes, consistency becomes much more natural. And in the next truth, we are going to explore why failure hurts the human brain so deeply, why rejection can feel physically painful sometimes, and how mentally strong people learn to reinterpret failure without destroying their self-worth. Truth number 3, failure hurts more than you think, because the brain treats rejection like danger. Let's talk about something deeply human. Failure hurts, rejection hurts, being ignored hurts, and honestly, many people secretly underestimate how psychologically painful setbacks can become over time, because failure is not only intellectual, it is emotional, biological, neurological. When something important to you collapses, your brain does not simply process information, it processes threat. That is why rejection can feel physically heavy sometimes. Your chest feels tight. Your stomach drops, your energy disappears, you overthink at night, you replay conversations in your head, you question your value, and sometimes You even feel embarrassed for trying in the first place. That experience is real, and psychologically, there is a reason for it. Human beings evolved as social creatures for thousands of years. Belonging to a group was directly connected to survival. Isolation could mean danger, so the brain became extremely sensitive to rejection, failure, criticism, and exclusion. Even today, modern setbacks can activate old survival systems inside the brain. That is why emotional pain can feel so intense. Your brain interprets failure, embarrassment, social judgment as threats to identity and safety. Now listen carefully, because this next idea is extremely important. Failure itself is often not what destroys people psychologically. Meaning destroys people, the meaning they attach to failure. For example, two people can experience the same rejection. One person says, "This proves I'm worthless." The other says, "This hurts, but I'm still learning." Same event, completely different emotional outcome. This is why interpretation matters so much. Now let me tell you something fascinating about the human brain. The brain naturally remembers negative experiences more strongly than positive ones. Psychologists sometimes call this the negativity bias. Your brain pays extra attention to painful experiences because historically, negative events could threaten survival, so one criticism can emotionally overpower 10 compliments. One rejection can temporarily erase months of progress from your memory. And honestly, this is exactly why persistence becomes psychologically difficult, because the brain often magnifies failure emotionally. Now think about this carefully. How many people stop trying after one embarrassing moment, one failed business, one bad conversation, one low-view video, one painful breakup, one exam failure, one public mistake? Not because recovery was impossible, but because emotionally, the brain interpreted the experience as danger, stop immediately. And honestly, this is why emotionally resilient people are different. Not because they enjoy failure. Nobody enjoys failure. But because they learned how to separate event from identity. This is powerful. Failing at something does not automatically mean you are a failure. Being rejected does not automatically reduce your value. Struggling temporarily does not define your future permanently. But emotionally, the brain often mixes these things together. Now here's another important truth. Many people secretly attach their self-worth entirely to results. If they succeed, they feel valuable. If they fail, they feel broken. That creates extremely fragile confidence because life naturally includes setbacks. No human being succeeds continuously forever without difficulty. That is unrealistic. And honestly, one of the healthiest psychological skills you can build is this: learning to protect your identity while still learning from failure. That balance matters deeply because ignoring mistakes completely is unhealthy, but destroying your self-worth after every setback is equally destructive. Emotionally strong people usually develop a middle mindset, something like, "This failure hurts, but it is information, not the final definition of my life." That perspective creates resilience. Now let's talk about embarrassment. Honestly, embarrassment stops more dreams than lack of talent. People are often not afraid of hard work itself. They are afraid of looking foolish, being judged, failing publicly, starting small. That fear becomes especially powerful in today's world because of social media. People compare their beginning to somebody else's highlight reel. They see polished success, but not years of invisible struggle behind it. And because of that, many people secretly believe, if I'm not immediately impressive, I'm already behind. But real growth almost never looks impressive at the beginning. In fact, most meaningful growth looks awkward early on. That is normal. Now listen carefully because this next sentence matters deeply. The people you admire today were once beginners nobody noticed. They made mistakes quietly. They doubted themselves. They improved slowly, but they continued long enough for growth to become visible. That is the difference. Now here's something fascinating psychologically. The brain often wants certainty before action, but growth usually requires action before certainty. That creates tension. You want guarantees. The brain wants proof of safety. But persistence often means moving forward before confidence fully arrives. And honestly, this is one reason courage matters so much. Courage is not feeling no fear. Courage is acting while fear is still present. That changes everything psychologically. Now let me tell you another hidden truth. Many people become mentally trapped after failure because they start building a negative identity around pain. They begin saying, I always fail. I'm unlucky. I'm not disciplined. I'm not talented enough. And after enough repetition, those thoughts start feeling like truth. But the brain believes repeated narratives. That is why self-talk matters more than many people realize. Your inner voice slowly shapes emotional reality. And honestly, people who never give up often become very careful about how they interpret difficult moments internally. Not fake positivity, not delusion. Healthy interpretation. Something like, this setback is painful, but temporary. I can improve. I can adapt. I can learn. That type of thinking keeps the nervous system calmer during difficulty. Now, here's another important thing. Failure often contains information success hides. Sometimes setbacks reveal weak strategies, poor habits, emotional blind spots, unhealthy routines, wrong environments. And people who grow long-term usually learn how to extract lessons without destroying themselves emotionally. That is intelligent resilience. Now think about this honestly. What if failure is not always a stop sign? What if sometimes it is simply feedback showing where adjustment is needed? That perspective changes persistence completely. Because now failure becomes guidance, not identity. And honestly, that mindset protects people psychologically during long, difficult journeys. Now, before we finish this truth, I want you to remember something forever. You are allowed to feel disappointed. You are allowed to feel frustrated. You are allowed to rest emotionally after difficult moments. But do not confuse temporary emotional pain with permanent inability. Those are not the same thing, because sometimes the moment you feel most tempted to quit is actually the moment your character is being strengthened the most quietly. And in the next truth, we are going to explore why small daily habits become more powerful than giant emotional bursts, and why consistency quietly changes human identity more deeply than motivation ever can. Truth number 5, rest is not weakness. Burnout is what quietly destroys persistence. Let's talk about something extremely important that many people misunderstand completely. Rest is not quitting, and honestly, this truth can save people from emotionally destroying themselves while chasing growth. Because today, many people think persistence means constant pressure. Always working, always pushing, always grinding, always forcing. And if they slow down even for a moment, they feel guilty, weak, unproductive. But psychologically, human beings were never designed to live under endless pressure without recovery. The brain needs restoration, the nervous system needs calm, emotions need space, and people who ignore this for too long often experience something dangerous: burnout. Now listen carefully, because burnout is not simple tiredness. Burnout is deeper. It is emotional exhaustion mixed with mental detachment and loss of internal energy. At first, you still care deeply about your goal, but slowly, your emotional connection begins fading. You become numb, disconnected, uninspired. Even small tasks feel heavy. And honestly, many people confuse burnout with laziness, but they are not the same thing. Lazy people avoid effort completely. Burned out people often cared too much for too long without proper recovery. That difference matters psychologically. Now, let me tell you something important about the human nervous system. Your brain constantly balances between two states: stress and recovery, challenge and safety, effort and restoration. When this balance disappears, mental performance begins collapsing. Focus weakens. Patience decreases. Emotional reactions intensify. And motivation becomes unstable. This is why people sometimes suddenly quit goals they once loved deeply. Not because the dream disappeared, but because their nervous system became overwhelmed. Now think about this honestly. How many people abandoned fitness, business, creative work, English learning, personal goals, not because they lacked potential, but because they pushed themselves with unsustainable emotional pressure? Probably millions. And honestly, this is one reason why intelligent persistence matters more than blind intensity. Because persistence is not destroy yourself until success arrives. Persistence is build a rhythm your mind and body can survive long term. That is much healthier psychologically. Now here's something fascinating. The brain learns better during balanced recovery periods. This is especially true in learning. For example, many people believe studying English for 10 exhausting hours is automatically better. But cognitive research consistently shows that focused repetition combined with rest often improves retention and long-term learning much more effectively than pure overload. Why? Because the brain consolidates information during periods of rest and reduced stress. This means recovery is not wasted time. Recovery is part of adaptation. And honestly, this changes how you should view persistence completely. Now let's talk about emotional recovery. Emotionally strong people are not constantly intense. Often, they simply learned how to reset without abandoning their goals. That's powerful. Because many people think there are only two options: push endlessly or quit completely. But psychologically, healthy persistence usually lives in the middle. Sometimes you need slower pace, better sleep, less pressure, more balance, more reflection. Not because you are weak, but because sustainable growth requires energy management. Now here's another important truth. Your brain performs worse under chronic emotional pressure. When stress becomes constant, the nervous system stays in survival mode, and survival mode narrows thinking. You become more reactive, more impatient, more negative. Small problems suddenly feel enormous. That's why burned out people often lose perspective emotionally. The brain stops processing challenges calmly. Now listen carefully, because this next idea matters deeply. People who never give up long-term usually learn how to protect their nervous system. not just their ambition. That means resting before collapse, maintaining healthy routines, allowing emotional recovery, building sustainable habits, and understanding that progress sometimes includes slowing down temporarily. And honestly, this mindset prevents many unnecessary breakdowns. Now, let me tell you something extremely important. Rest and avoidance are not the same thing. This is where many people become confused. Rest says, I need recovery so I can continue. Avoidance says, I'm escaping because discomfort scares me. Those are psychologically different. Rest reconnects you to your goal. Avoidance disconnects you from it. That's why self-awareness matters so much. You must learn to ask yourself honestly, am I recovering or am I hiding? That question changes everything. Now, here's another hidden truth. Sometimes your environment creates burnout more than the goal itself. Too much comparison, too much pressure, too much noise, too much unrealistic expectation. Modern life constantly pushes people to perform publicly all the time, and honestly, that creates psychological exhaustion because human beings were not designed to constantly compare their private struggles to thousands of polished online success stories. That damages emotional balance deeply. Now let's talk about recovery rituals. Mentally resilient people often develop small habits that calm the nervous system regularly. Walking quietly, sleeping properly, deep breathing, journaling, prayer, exercise, silence, music, nature, healthy conversation. These things may appear small, but psychologically, they protect emotional stability, and emotional stability protects persistence. Now think about this carefully. What happens if you reach success emotionally destroyed? What happens if you achieve your goal, but lose your peace completely? That is not healthy persistence. That is survival mode. And honestly, real growth should strengthen your life, not slowly erase your emotional health. Now, here's something beautiful about sustainable persistence. When your nervous system feels safer, your brain becomes more creative, more patient, more flexible, more resilient. And this actually improves long-term performance because calm persistence often lasts longer than emotional intensity. Now, let me tell you another important truth. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is pause briefly without abandoning your direction. That is wisdom, not weakness. Even athletes recover between training sessions. Muscles grow during recovery. And psychologically, human resilience works similarly. Now listen carefully, because this next sentence matters deeply. You do not need to punish yourself to prove you deserve success. You do not need constant suffering to validate your ambition. Real persistence is not emotional violence against yourself. It is stable forward movement, guided by self-awareness, recovery, and intelligent discipline. That is sustainable strength. Now, before we finish this truth, I want you to remember something forever. Rest is not the opposite of persistence. Burnout is. Because burned out people often disappear completely from their goals. But rested people return stronger, calmer, more focused, more emotionally stable. And honestly, the people who last longest are often not the people who push hardest every day. They are the people who learned how to continue without destroying themselves internally. And in the final truth, we are going to explore the deepest psychological shift of all. Why people who never give up eventually stop chasing motivation entirely and begin building a relationship with meaning, purpose, and personal identity that becomes stronger than temporary emotion itself. Truth number 6. People who never give up stop chasing motivation. They start living through meaning. Now we arrive at the deepest psychological truth of all. And honestly, this may be the difference between temporary persistence and lifelong resilience. Because eventually, people who truly never give up stop depending on motivation completely, not because motivation disappears forever, but because something deeper replaces it: meaning, purpose, identity. Now think about this carefully. Motivation is emotional. It changes constantly. Some mornings you wake up inspired, other mornings you feel tired, uncertain, emotionally heavy. That is normal human psychology. But meaning works differently. Meaning stays important even when emotions fluctuate. For example, a parent may feel exhausted, but still continue working for their children. An athlete may feel pain, but still continue training because the goal matters deeply. A learner may feel discouraged, but still continue practicing because becoming fluent represents freedom, opportunity, and personal growth. That is meaning-driven persistence. And honestly, this type of persistence becomes much stronger than emotional excitement alone. Now listen carefully, because this next idea is powerful. People can survive enormous difficulty when they feel connected to meaningful purpose. Psychologists have studied this for decades. Human beings tolerate discomfort much more effectively when suffering feels connected to something valuable instead of meaningless pain. This changes everything psychologically because suddenly, the difficult moments stop feeling empty. They become part of something larger. Now let me ask you something honestly. Why do you want your goals? Not the surface answer. The deeper answer. Why do you want to learn English? Why do you want success? Why do you want change? Because underneath every strong goal, there is usually an emotional reason: freedom, security, expression, connection, respect, growth, peace, possibility. And honestly, people who never give up usually stay emotionally connected to that deeper reason. Not just temporary excitement, meaning. Now here's something extremely important. When goals have no emotional meaning, discipline eventually becomes exhausting because the brain struggles to tolerate repeated discomfort without emotional purpose. That's why people abandon goals that never truly mattered to them internally. But meaningful goals create emotional endurance. Now let's talk about identity again, but at a deeper level. Eventually, persistent people stop seeing their effort as something they are trying. It becomes part of who they are. A writer writes, a learner learns, an athlete trains, a resilient person continues. That identity becomes emotionally stabilizing because now, difficulty no longer feels like evidence that you should stop. Difficulty simply becomes part of the journey itself. This is a massive psychological shift. Now, here's another hidden truth. People who never give up often stop obsessing over immediate outcomes. Instead, they become emotionally committed to growth itself. This creates calm persistence. Because if your happiness depends only on quick, visible success, your emotions become unstable constantly. But when growth itself becomes meaningful, progress feels valuable even before massive results appear. And honestly, this mindset protects mental health deeply during long, difficult seasons. Now listen carefully, because this next sentence matters deeply. Sometimes the greatest transformation happens long before visible success appears externally. your patience changes, your emotional regulation changes, your confidence changes, your habits change, your identity changes. And those invisible transformations often matter more than the external result itself. Because eventually, success becomes difficult to remove from people whose identity transformed completely. Now, let me tell you something beautiful about persistence. The people who continue long-term often develop quiet confidence, not loud confidence, not fake positivity. Quiet confidence, the kind that says, I know difficult moments will come, but I also know I can survive them. That confidence becomes emotionally powerful because it is built through lived experience, not temporary emotion. Now think about this carefully. Every difficult season you survive teaches your nervous system something. Every setback overcome becomes psychological proof. Every moment where you continue despite fear strengthens self-trust. And slowly, your relationship with difficulty changes. You stop seeing obstacles as signs to quit. You start seeing them as part of growth itself. That mindset changes everything. Now, here's another important truth. People who never give up are not endlessly forcing themselves every second. Often, they simply developed emotional flexibility. They adapt, adjust, recover, continue. That's resilience, not rigid perfection. Adaptation. And honestly, adaptation is one of the most important psychological skills in human survival and success. Now let's talk about comparison. Comparison quietly destroys meaning for many people because instead of focusing on their own growth, people become obsessed with somebody else's timeline, somebody else's success, somebody else's speed. And psychologically, this creates emotional exhaustion because there will always be somebody faster, richer, more advanced, more experienced. But persistence becomes much easier when your focus returns to personal meaning instead of endless comparison. Now listen carefully, because this next idea is life-changing. Your journey does not need to look impressive immediately to be meaningful. That matters deeply. Some transformations happen slowly, quietly, internally, before the world notices anything externally. And honestly, many powerful futures are built during seasons where progress feels almost invisible. Now, before we finish this episode, I want you to remember something forever. Never giving up does not mean never feeling fear, never feeling tired, never doubting yourself. It means refusing to let temporary emotion make permanent decisions for your future. That is the real psychology of persistence. And honestly, that mindset can completely transform a human life over time. Because eventually, the people who continue growing are usually not the people with perfect motivation. They are the people who found deeper meaning than discomfort. Now let's end this journey together. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to struggle. You are allowed to feel uncertain sometimes. But do not abandon yourself during difficult seasons. Because growth is rarely linear, and some of the strongest versions of yourself are built during moments where nothing feels obvious yet. So continue, not because the journey is always easy, but because the person you are becoming is worth fighting for. And remember this forever. Your future is not built only by talent. It is built by the moments where you quietly decide, I will continue. Even now, especially now. Thank you so much for listening. And if this episode helped you see persistence, discipline, and emotional strength differently, Subscribe to Native Flow for more deep English learning podcasts about psychology, mindset, confidence, communication, and personal growth. Keep learning, keep growing, and most importantly, keep continuing.